Well, it's that time of year again, where we all come together as a community to collectively debate and mull over the Overwatch League MVP conversation. Earlier in the week, the Overwatch League revealed their top 10 on the ballot this year, and the list goes as follows. Proper, Kevster, Hanbin, Lip, Shu, Prophet, Smurf, Zest, Hotto, and Kai. Of all these candidates, some obviously deserve it more than others, and to be completely honest, it does feel like a couple of guys are missing. It was a little surprising, at least for me, to not see guys like Violet, or maybe another Dallas player, Dante, MN3, maybe even Lee J gone. And I'm sure there's some other snuffs that I'm missing out on, so be sure to let me know who else should have been on the ballot down in the comments below. But anyway, today we're going to be having the great MVP debate. My intention in today's video is to decide who my personal frontrunner for the award is, and along with that, I'll give you my prediction as to who I think the league ends up selecting. To get there, I intend to go over every player on the list. We're going to highlight their accomplishments, statistics, and general things that have made their season so good. But along with that, I'll likely give you cases that can be made against them just to be fair. Let's begin with the top of the order, aka Proper. And obviously, he is a must-have on this ballot. You could argue he's been the best damage dealer in the Overwatch League. He was phenomenal across multiple heroes during the regular season, and was consistently putting the highest level of competition in their place. And it kind of goes without saying that the Shock would be nothing without this guy. Proper has been their rock. We have seen what happens when he is either not fully enabled or when the team around him is struggling. The Shock simply have a way harder time winning games. They put their resources into him in hopes that he will carry them to victory all by himself. It's very Leave and Jonak-esque if you ask me. I mean, how many games has he literally done everything just to keep his team alive, let alone winning? So many pivotal maps have gone this team's way because of his insane solo carry antics. The man had high expectations on his shoulders as a very hyped up rookie, and he has delivered every step of the way. There is no Shock without Proper. As the league leader in both total eliminations and damage, he is one of the most impactful players in the entire game. Okay, but what arguments can maybe be put against this man? Well, for a lot of people, they're going to point out the lack of tournament championships, and it's a fair point. He's so good and everything, but he really can't get over this hump, so to speak. Winning means everything to a lot of sports fans. He's clutch, but not clutch enough seemingly. But just to make a counter-argument, we did see Leave win the MVP 1 year prior under similar circumstances, so it might not be the biggest deal. He was putting up similar performances with no first place finishes to be found. So if you're an advocate of Leave for MVP, then you can't really hold that against Proper. However, with how close the race has been, this one factor just might be enough to edge him out of the conversation, since the competition is pretty tough. It truly depends on who you're talking to with this kind of thing. For me, he's definitely still one of the top options for sure, because he really has put up an all-time great kind of year. Now let's move on to our next candidate. It's Kevster time, and just like Proper, Kevster is just, he's gotta be on here, no doubt about it. His flexibility has been put on display all year, and no matter how the Glads end up playing, he is always showing up. His heroics on dive heroes were a main focal point in helping his team win back-to-back tournaments. He's played at a top level all year, he's the leader of his team arguably, and he's winning. Those three things alone make him one of the top options. Kevster has been pivotal in keeping the Glads afloat. As different iterations, lineups, and metas have come through, Kevster has stuck around. Everything else on this team has been shifted around at certain points, but he has always been that one constant. It goes to show just how flexible and reliable he really is, and the Glads have really needed that out of him. He's a real hero and just an absolute DPS warlord. Kevster is one of the top choices on the ballot, and it's not close. He has everything that you are looking for in an MVP. The only problem is, he too might have some blemishes on his resume. As good as the 2 tournament titles look, he still did miss out on the Summer Showdown, which isn't the best of looks. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, if you're a top player on a top level team, you have no excuse to be going 2-4 in a stage. But also, you could argue that the absence of a certain individual from their lineup during this time was a major reason for their failures, which in turn degrades the value of Kevster slightly and puts it more towards his teammate, who we'll talk about later. And I'd say with the Glad's title runs, a lot of it revolved around just really good team play and everybody stepping up in these masterclass performances, so to speak. So it's not just on Kevster for sure, but in general I'd say that most of this stuff isn't a huge deal. If Kevster did win the MVP award, I wouldn't be mad at all. It's clear how important that he is to the success of the LA Gladiators. He's had a really good year, he's got the accolades you're looking for, he is a perfect MVP level player. But how about we take a little break from DPS and give our boy Hanbin some love? Now this is a man that is putting up a crazy year. In a year where tank play has completely changed, he stepped up to the highest degree. To say that he has meant everything to the Fuel's success would be an understatement. It can be argued that he was clearly the most impactful tank in 2 out of 4 stages. When you're the clear-cut best Zarya and Junker Queen player, that's kind of a big deal. His Zarya helped play a huge role in Dallas finding their footing early on during the year, and with their late season push, and the way that he carried on the Queen played a massive role during the Summer Showdown title run and their current hot streak that has helped them be first place in the West as of right now. I swear, sometimes it feels like Dallas have a third DPS out there. That's the kind of effect that Hanbin has on a game. He's the first or second best overall tank player in the league as it currently stands, and it's not particularly close. Some might criticize him for not being what they need in every possible meta, and for sometimes splitting time with Fearless, which is fair, but I don't really think it's a huge deal. All you have to do is look at how much better this team has played when Hanbin's in the game. At their best moments, Hanbin is present in the lineup. That's when the epic comebacks and the dominance always seem to occur. Dallas are simply not the same team without him, and if they start Fearless more, I don't think there's any way they're sitting at the top of the West right now. I mean, you can literally see the difference. The man has the 3rd most eliminations of all tank players in the league, with 5+ hours less than the guys ahead of him. That is what we call impact. The strategies that Dallas make revolve around his talents. As other guys have come and gone, he has remained an absolute constant. Hanbin winning the MVP would be so well deserved, and I would not be complaining. MVP candidate number 4 to highlight is Lip. Shanghai have had a couple of ups and downs this year, but man, Lip has been so clean through it all. Number 4 in eliminations, number 3 in damage league-wide. That makes it more than apparent. But it goes way beyond the stats. I mean, there have been so many times where it feels like he's the main reason why his team is relevant in the first place. From Soldier 76 to one of the best Sojourn players in the league, Lip is once again flexing his superstar potential on a day-to-day basis. When he has any space to maneuver at all, the opposition ends up feeling his wrath big time, and you can tell how badly Shanghai suffer when they fail to get him going. In a year where DPS has meant everything, Lip has been more important than he arguably ever has before for the Shanghai team. And I'd say he's had a particularly strong second half of the year to really make people remember how good he is. He is by far one of the most skilled and important damage dealers in the Overwatch League, and it's good to see him on the list. It makes a lot of sense. However, you may not be able to make the greatest case for him this year, because Shanghai for one just aren't as strong this year. They have their one tournament, which is fantastic, but there's a lot of questionable losses on the year, and his campaign just is not quite as impressive as last year's. Lip should be in the conversation for sure, but I don't even know if he's top 3. Now for the one and only support player to make the ballot. Shu is representing the entirety of his role all by himself, which is really weird by the way, but regardless, I'm glad to see him on here. Shu is having a somewhat underrated year. To begin with, he is top 5 among all flex supports when it comes to healing and damage per 10. He's an absolute menace on the flex support role. He gets the kills, he hits the clutch cooldowns, and he keeps his team alive simultaneously. However, there's one thing that clearly demonstrates his value that's definitely worth bringing up more than the other things. Much like Hanbin, Shu's team is just not as good without him in the lineup. We saw the consequences of having Shu be out of the starting lineup for a whole stage during the Summer Showdown. It was not pretty, as the Glads only went 2-4. It is so obvious that he plays a major factor in keeping his team in one piece, which is really crazy by the way, because it's not like he plays for a bad team. He plays for a title contender. They are absolutely stacked. And yet, if he's not around, they just lose. When he starts, the result is 2 stage titles. Without him, 2-4. That is value to a T. And considering he's the only support player on the ballot this year, that's a real testament to the kind of attention that he's receiving. However, This year just isn't as impressive as his 2021 campaign, much like with Lip. He's still excellent, don't get me wrong, but it's not the same kind of hard carry stuff that feels MVP worthy, you know? He simply has not stuck out as much, and you could argue that he isn't even the best performing player on his team this year, as that honor really might go to Kevster instead, as DPS just means so much more to the game right now, and it's hard to ignore it. All you really have to do is look at the lack of supports on the ballot this year. It's impressive, but it also goes both ways. So for that, you probably don't love Shu's chances. He honestly might have just gotten thrown in here just to have a support on the ballot. I get the feeling the league wanted to avoid the masses throwing an absolute riot. Shu being here is not an issue and it's deserved, it just feels like there's a handful of arguments that can be made against him this year. Now for candidate number 6, one of the most polarizing figures in the community. Let's have a talk about Prophet. There is not a single player in this league who gets so much love and hate at the same time. So the fact that he's going to be on the list this year is going to spark a lot of debates. But I myself am on Team Prophet in this scenario, as I believe he just has to be here. In my honest opinion, this is the best that Prophet has looked for the entirety of a year since Season 1. He's regained that peak form of his. In other years, you could maybe argue that he wasn't quite a top-level player in the league, but this year is absolutely not the case. Prophet has been outstanding. You can make the argument that he was the best or at least top 3 at DPS during the regular season. Hell, you might even call him a top 3 player in general this year because he really has been that outstanding. His Tracer has been ridiculous and has largely been overshadowed by Proper despite being at the same level in my eyes. Prophet has made it look effortless at times with a number of clutch plays for his team throughout the entire year. There were times where it felt like he could literally do anything he wanted to as he'd casually get a 3 or a 4K, maybe even an entire ace. He has meant everything for the Dynasty in their insanely good regular season and was the X factor in helping them win the kickoff clash. The man's flexibility has come in clutch a lot of the time this year. When the team needed him to step up on the Brigitte, since they were in the process of trading creative, he showed up. He was a tad bit over-aggressive at times, sure, but his experience was still quite effective, and he was very good on that hero despite playing DPS throughout the entire year before then. Him stepping off his main role allowed for his team to be the most effective. He was able to contribute in other ways still, while unselfishly helping his team win more games. That is true leadership right there, and I applaud Prophet for not losing a step through any of it. However, some might argue that his value is not number 1, since there are other people on his team who have been just as important to the team's success. We saw what happened when they lacked a main tank in previous years. They just could not get over the hump. Now they finally have that, and they're good now. That's the thing with Seoul, right? They have their MVP level guys, but their success often largely depends on excellent team play rather than individuals. While there's nothing inherently wrong with that, it definitely does help paint a picture in people's heads. Like, yeah, you're amazing, but so is your entire team. You know what I mean? And while I personally like how he could flex onto Brig and other things, a lot of people may not be a huge fan of it as it kind of depreciates his value as a DPS player since the team could still find success with Stalker on that role instead. I realize a lot of what I'm saying is nitpicky, but that's what you gotta do. An MVP should have as little flaws as humanly possible. But luckily for Prophet, most of his stuff is pretty minor, so he's going to be a leader in this race for sure. Now for the second Dynasty member to make the cut. How about we talk about Smurf? I, for one, have a lot of appreciation for what he did this year, and I'm happy he made the cut. What he's done in 2022 is nothing short of God's work. He is one of 2 tank players who had to be on this ballot no matter what. Smurf has been absolutely dominant from start to finish and has arguably gotten stronger as time has gone on. And that's saying something because he was never actually bad or anything. His Winston, which is arguably number 1 in the league by a long shot, has played a huge role in his team's recent success as well as their tournament run. His dives alongside Prophet and Fitz have been nothing short of perfection. And despite being a new player on the Seoul core, he immediately has fit in as one of their true leaders. His consistency deserves nothing but praise. But these aren't the only reasons he's arguably the league's most important player. He's also taken on the role of having to be a flex with supreme grace. There's a lot of pressure you're facing if you're a team's one and only tank player. They pretty much ride and die by you. It all depends on how well you play, because you have no backup whatsoever. You have to learn all of the tanks in the game by yourself, and Smurf has done exactly that. He stepped up out of his main tank comfort zone with all of the pressure in the world in his face, and has looked good no matter what Seoul decide to play. He's been a high-level Zarya, Junker Queen, Sigma, his Winston is insane. The man has done everything. He has been given a lot of responsibility and has handled it so well. For most players, I'd say they'd be satisfied just to be okay on a bunch of new heroes that they've never played before, but Smurf took his flexibility and level of play to new heights. I mean, this is arguably the best he has played to date, as he's established himself as one of the best and most important players in the entire league. Smurf has been a superstar both from the eye test and statistically. He very well might be the top player at his position. He truly has been the dynasty's rock, and he definitely deserves all of the attention that he has been receiving as of late. And to be completely honest, you can't make a lot of cases against the guy. Maybe you could say that he is only the best tank on Winston, and maybe you could also argue he's not as valuable compared to other guys here, since he clearly shares the spotlight with Prophet, who has been equally as valuable to Soul success. And of course, my argument with Prophet stands with Smurf as well. He plays for a really good overall team that revolves around playing as a unit rather than with individual pop-offs. So that in turn could maybe subtract some value points, but in general, there's really not a lot that you can pit against Smurf. He very well might be one of the most worthy selections to win the award, and I truly hope that the public gives him the attention he deserves. Staying on the topic of APAC players, you've got Zest. Now, initially, I was a little shocked to see him on here. Not because he doesn't deserve it or anything, but because I didn't think the league would give him this type of recognition, since Philly have been pretty mediocre record-wise. While Zest may not be a top-level candidate in most people's eyes, it's not too far-fetched to say that he at least deserves to be in the running. In spite of the fusion being up and down, Zest has remained a constant. His play at the flex DPS position has been very meaningful for this Philly team. Through the good and the bad, he has made plays to keep his team in matches. He's played 5 heroes for at least 30 minutes this year, and has looked pretty solid on all of them. In particular, he has put on an absolute clinic on Genji, and is maybe one of the most underappreciated Tracer players on the planet. He sometimes gets overshadowed by bigger names on this team, and it's a real shame. He really is an X-Factor player who does a lot of the dirty work. Did you know that he was the first player in the East to reach 1,000 final blows this year? The very first one, and that's with some very talented DPS players lining up next to him in the Eastern Conference. I mean, that's a major statement. Zest has put up a solid showcase this year in the regular season, and his clutch performances during tournament play are not to be underlooked either. Him and his partner MN3 have formed a sick rookie 1-2 punch that is terrifying to deal with. But unlike MN3 or any of the other guys on his team, Zest has always remained in the starting lineup basically. He has that heavier lines factor and the playmaking that you're looking for in an MVP. So in a way, the league kind of nailed him being here. You could maybe argue a few other people over him, but the stats are undeniable in terms of what he means to this Fusion team, so I'm okay with him being here. Now with that said, he's not a top option. Again, Philly have not accomplished all that much. They've consistently performed well in tournaments, but have never really come close to winning. And the sad truth remains that his partner MN3 might be even more important to Philly's success. We've seen it firsthand all year. The Fusion play at their best when MN3 is in the game doing his thing. If they fail to get him going, or have him on the bench for that matter, they're just not as big of a threat. So in a way, you might argue that MN3 deserves the nod instead. I for one am completely fine with Zest being here, but plenty of arguments can be made against him. Now for arguably the most controversial nominee on the entire list. Hotto. Oh man, this is one that's going to spark some debate. More on that in a little. First, let's recap why he's here in the first place. So Hotto's rise to prominence is in direct correlation to London having a way better year than expected. Love or hate this guy, he definitely helped improve this team tremendously. And it's undeniable that oftentimes, Hotto is the focal point of London's game plan. When they play rush comps, it's all about Hotto, you know? And the same thing with the Junker Queen comps. It's all about playing behind his brawly and aggressive playstyle, and it shows that he is a true leader who inspires the entire unit with how much of a chat he is. And that itself is what value is all about. Hotto clearly means a lot to this London squad, and they're likely not the same team without him. He brings the energy and the huge plays on Ryan. London have never been a top tier team, but they sure as hell feel like one at times when anybody tries to match them on the rush composition. London can put some really good teams in their place if they try to match Hotto and the boys. And for good reason, right? Hotto is arguably the best Ryan in the entire world right now. When London played Ryan or Junker Queen, so much revolved around this one man, and he made the most of it. Hotto did really good this year and deserves a lot of credit. Now, with that being said, Hotto being here to begin with when there's so many deserving people who got snuffed is pretty wild to me, as I wholeheartedly disagree with the selection. The Spitfire have just not been anywhere close to a top tier team, they haven't made any good tournament runs, and I don't even know if he's the best player on his own team. I love Hotto, but part of me thinks the league is just cashing in on his popularity. Hotto 100% deserves credit for helping the Spitfire have an underdog season, but that's not really enough to warrant an MVP selection. He hasn't been all that great outside of Rush Comms, and there's no real achievement for him or the Spitfire to speak of. Hotto is awesome, but this might be a little too much credit. And now finally we can move on to our last candidate, aka Kai. And admittedly speaking, I'm a little surprised to see him here. Kai is an awesome player, and Atlanta probably deserves to have some sort of recognition for their strong first half of the year, so I'm glad they have some sort of representation. And it's not like Kai is a bad player and he's having a bad year or anything. His play on snipers has been absolutely elite, and in particular he has demonstrated a world-class sojourn that has played a huge role in his team going on a wild losers bracket run during the midseason madness. Kai is pretty legit, and the Reigns certainly have played at their best when he is a part of their lineup. However, I kinda disagree with him being on here. I'm a little surprised they didn't go with Hawk instead for being one of the most high impact and flexible tanks in the entire league. Like, Kai's been great, but he may not even be the most valuable member of his own team. There's been plenty of times where he either shares playtime with somebody else or gets benched entirely. He's not always a constant, which degrades his value, especially when compared to a lot of the other DPS players on this list who do always play. Don't get me wrong, I love Kai to death, but I do not see him finishing very high in the voting. Much like with Hotto, I'm not exactly sure if I agree with the league selection here, but oh well, I'm not going to think too much of it. Anyway, those are your 10 MVP candidates for 2022. We've made cases for them and against them, so now all that's left to do is choose a winner. After putting some thought into it, my choice for the 2022 MVP is, drumroll please, Proper. I know, not a very controversial take, but Proper has all the credentials that I personally am looking for in an MVP. I understand that the Shock have not won anything this year and have maybe shown off some recent struggles, which in turn could be a turnoff for a lot of people. I get that, especially as a traditional sports fan who gets how important accolades can be, but I'm never shy to pick someone just because of something like this. I'm looking for who is objectively the best and most important player in the entire league. And if we're going off that kind of stuff, it just has to be Proper. The Shock are not the team they are without this guy. Every single game that they have played has heavily revolved around his particular talent. Without Proper, the Shock don't go anywhere at all. He deadlifts them constantly and has made so many insane highlights over the course of this year. And the stats don't lie. He's outputted a historic kind of year. As of this recording, he's the only guy in the league with 3,000 plus eliminations and over 1.3 million damage. There's a lot going on for him, and regardless of the lack of first place finishes, think about where the Shock are without him. San Fran might be really talented, but there are times where they follow this guy like a lost puppy. So many individual moments of brilliance come from this one man. Win or loss, you know that Proper's gonna show up. Proper put up a brilliant regular season, and he did so much more than literally anybody else in the entire league. And this is talking simply from an individual standpoint, which is obviously the main gauge that you're looking for with an MVP. So unlike a Smurf or a Prophet or Kevster nomination even, Proper doesn't have that guy that matches up to him. His value is clearly the highest on his team. But what's going to separate him from a monster like Hanbin, let's say? Well, for me, it's the over-reliance factor. Hanbin has shared playtime with Fearless, and I think that the field have still remained pretty good overall even without Hanbin. Obviously, they're a lot better with him, but my point still stands. Without Proper, the Shock are pretty much nothing. Hanbin, you could argue he's the best tank player in the league, but with Proper, you could also argue he's the best at his position, and he's on a worse team that needs him more. They pump so many resources into this one man just praying that it's going to be enough to win. And at other moments, he doesn't even get that type of help. He does it alone. Compared to all the other MVP candidates, it's pretty clear to me that the Shock take the biggest hit with their record potentially if Proper is absent. It's just like Leave 1 year prior. Dallas have the best record thanks to Hanbin, but it's within reason to assume that they'd find ways to adapt. With the Shock, you're just not getting that same feeling. Proper has no equal lining up next to him. Proper is putting up an all-time great regular season in his first year. Literally from day one, he was already one of the league's most important players, and that trend has literally never stopped. If anything, the hype has only built and built and built some more. Other players in the race had their moments where maybe people didn't talk about them as much for a little bit for one reason or another, but the Proper talk never ever ceased. The last time I saw something like this was probably back in 2018 with Jonek. When you generate that kind of buzz, clearly you deserve to win this award. I thought about maybe going against him for his lack of stage titles, but I just can't get myself to do it. He's too great of a player having too great of a year to be ignored, and he 100% has my vote. If you want to know who would come after Proper, for me it goes Hanbin second, Prophet third, Smurf fourth, and Kevster fifth, then everybody else. Doesn't really matter the order. But Proper in general is definitely my front runner. So yeah, Proper is going to have my vote, not that it really matters, but who do I actually think is going to win when the league announces the results? Well, Proper, I'd say, likely wins in a landslide. After Leaf won the MVP last year for not winning anything, it's obvious that this is pretty much a non-factor. Proper is receiving hype like we've never seen, and he is the face of this league right now without question. He possesses all the right things to get the fans on his side, and I believe that the final results will show that quite clearly. There's a lot of good players on the ballot this year, but by the time the results are in, I'd expect Proper to win with relative ease. There's way too much hype to expect otherwise. Fans, analysts, coaches, they all see it, and if you think differently, I suggest you start facing reality before it's too late. But with that said, that just about wraps up my discussion for this year's Overwatch League MVP race. Overall, it's a pretty good list with a couple of exceptions. The only issue is, the race itself might not be very close, which is a real bummer because there's a lot of deserving guys on the ballot. But maybe you think differently, so how about I turn it over to you? Who do you think deserves to win the 2022 MVP? Leave a comment down below, and let's get this discussion going. And if you enjoyed the content, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to my channel if you're new. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.